you so much. That was very kind, Randy. And thank you to the Center for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. And thank you to Sachs and our other funders for supporting this event and all of our work here. And let's see if okay, great. So as Randy mentioned, I'm going to be talking about LGBTQ disparities in depression and suicide. Again, this is sort of a small part of my work, but it's something that's very important to me and I think important to the field, hopefully. So I'm going to be talking about a very broad and large community defined really around sexual orientation and gender identity. There's a lot of nuance within our community that I don't really have time to get into here, but I'm happy to talk about later. So I'm going to paint with sort of a broad brush here to give you a sense of the issue that we're trying to tackle. And I'm really going to start at sort of a 30,000-foot view to give you a sense of the scope, and then dig deeper into some of the work that we're doing in the lab here. So I'm going to start with a little bit of data from 2 studies that we've used recently. So last year we published an article using data from this large-scale study called the Healthy Mind Study that's run out of the University of Minnesota. Every year they do a large survey of students in higher education. And they've been running this for about 15 years. And we were able to dig into almost 500,000 responses, again, from college, medical students, graduate students. And at the same time, we've been looking at national data from the CDC. And they, every other year, do a large-scale survey study of mental health experiences of high school students across the United States. And we were able to dig into about 60,000 responses since 2015 for these kids. And so the first thing that I want to show people is the rates of people identifying as part of the LGBTQ community in both of these surveys. So I'm showing across each of the survey waves across time, and then the percent of people identifying within the sample. And so I just want to highlight that in both the higher ed sample on the left and the high school sample on the right, we see increasing rates of people openly identifying as LGBTQ across time. In this kind of longer higher ed sample, there's almost a 6-fold increase in people openly identifying. There's a lot of things contributing to this, which I'm, again, happy to talk about. I think sort of people's growing understanding of sexuality and gender, sort of societal acceptance that's been on the rise of gay marriage and similar initiatives, possibly into the last year or so. And that's really led more people to come to terms with their identity. And I'm going to flip now and show you the percentage of students both in higher ed and in high school that are reporting thinking about suicide. And this is sort of a severe kind of tip of the iceberg, so this translates also to depression and attempts as well, but I think is a kind of a leading indicator that we need to be concerned about. So the first thing you'll see is there's a very large increase in the percentage of students in both samples that are reporting thoughts of suicide recently. So as Josh mentioned, this is kind of a growing crisis and epidemic in our country, but there's also this persistent and highly salient disparity between the LGBT students and the other students. There's this about 3-fold increase that we see persistently over time. And so even though societal acceptance is on the rise, more people are kind of openly identifying as LGBT, we haven't done anything to decrease this 3-fold increase in students reporting thoughts of suicide. Sorry. And we see exactly the same thing if you look at depression rates as well. And both of these studies afford us a really exciting opportunity to dig into risk and protective factors. And I'm just going to pick out a couple highlights to show you here. So in the high school sample, a lot of these kids are reporting experiences of bullying, both in school and online. If we look among the LGBT students and split them based on whether they report experiences with cyberbullying, reporting this cyberbullying outside of school online essentially doubles their rate of reporting thoughts of suicide in the last year. Similar things for in school, but this kind of growing trend of social media and cyberbullying have been increasingly salient for this population. On the flip side, they're also asked about their family experiences and having strong parental involvement in the child's life does somewhat buffer. So we see a mitigation of these suicide rates among LGBT youth that report strong parental involvement. We were also able to look at sort of a broader legal landscape. So pulling from publicly available data that collate state-level laws. What you'll see here is a map of states, and the ones in dark green have anti-bullying legislation specifically protecting LGBT students. And what we're able to do is sort of combine averages of students within each of these states to see how this impacts mental health. And so what I'm showing is the percent of LGBT students that report thoughts of suicide, depending on whether they live in one of these states with or without anti-bullying laws. And we see this salient decrease in suicide ideation rates among LGBT high school students based on these anti-bullying laws in their states. And so this was data from 2020, and we're really going to need to watch how this changes in the current political climate and how these states either uphold or let these laws go. And so with that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some more of the work that we're doing in our lab here, where we're able to really kind of dive deeper into teens' sort of day-to-day experiences with depression. So this was a study that we published recently. This is work with Randy. One of our very talented students was very invested in this question and was able to kind of take a creative approach to the data that we have, including these smartphone data. So this was a sample of about 140 teenagers that were recruited both here in New York and also in the Chicago area. They're recruited for clinical assessment based on their history of depression. What we found is that about 40% of them identify as LGBTQ. And I just note that we don't do any recruitment based on identity. This is really pulling in kids based on mental health. So this was sort of incidental to the broader goals of the study. But what we find is that about 90% of our participants that identify as LGBTQ also report having a history of depression or active depression currently, compared to only about 50% of the other participants. And so even in our small kind of local data, we're seeing these same national trends playing out here. And so for this study, they do a lot of different things, and I'm just going to kind of pick out a few highlights again. So the kids come in for an intake assessment. We do sort of a clinical workup, and then we follow them for 6 months to track their mental health. And the key thing for the study is they also install an app called Ears on their phone that we use for two main purposes. One, we send them quick pings every day just to ask about their mood and their symptoms. And then we're also able to scrape a lot of data from the background of their phone. So we're doing a lot of interesting analyses right now, looking at kind of texting behavior, social media. But for the purpose of this, I'm going to talk about using GPS data from their phone. And I think from the other talks, you'll see kind of increasing usage of smartphones as a tool to really understand mental health. It's becoming very important in a lot of our work. So first, these are kind of example data that we get from teenagers in the study. So again, they install this app on their phone, and then every day it just pings them asking, how have you been feeling over the last day? And so I picked out two example participants from our study. And you can see a lot of fluctuations in their report. So 0 means I had a really bad day. 100 means feeling great today. So there's all this fluctuation for these two individuals over the course of the study. But what was very telling from, again, these two essentially randomly selected participants, the LGBT participants in our sample report worse mood overall. So when we kind of bundle all of the data together, the LGBT teens in our study report about 10% lower, worse mood day to day. And then what we're able to do is, again, pull that data from the back of their phone to do a lot of other analyses. So here, again, we're using GPS to get a sense of their daily activity. And so one of the indicators that we've been interested in, both as a risk factor for depression and also for suicide, is what we're calling homestay. So we are able to isolate where their home is and then track how much time they spend at home versus out and about in their daily lives. And so we can get that estimate on every single day and then pair it with how they were feeling that day. And so for this particular study, our student was interested in teens reporting how supportive they felt like their home environment was, sort of similar to what we're seeing in the CDC data. And so when we put all of those pieces together, we are able to isolate the association between how much time you spent at home from not at all to the whole day at home against their daily mood. And so we see the more time you spend at home, if you have a supportive home environment, the better your mood is on that given day. But for LGBT kids that are reporting unsupportive parental and family environments, spending time at home leads to worse mood on a day-to-day basis. I think this is a really important point, both about kind of fluctuations in mood and symptoms from day to day, but also a really important intervention point for these teens. And so just to kind of tie all these pieces together, there's very clear and repeated evidence that our LGBT community is about 3 times more likely to report depression and suicide risk. And as we see these kind of epidemic and rising levels of depression and suicide over time, the LGBT community makes up a larger and larger portion of that mental health burden nationally. And when we look at people's experiences and development of mental health, we can see that this is shaped at a number of different levels. So we're able to look at kind of family experiences, school experiences, bullying, but also this broader legal and cultural landscape. And I just want to give a couple more highlights of sort of our next steps for the lab. So first, we recently started a new study recruiting teens from our emergency department and our collaborators there to really track suicide risk after these kids are discharged from the emergency department. We follow their mental health, and we do a much more in-depth assessment of discrimination, including LGBT-related experiences. So we're able to follow them for about 6 months again after they leave the hospital. Through similar phone metrics, we're asking them about their experiences day-to-day with discrimination. And we're also using more intensive social media measures to, among other things, hopefully track experiences with cyberbullying and potentially exposure to anti-LGBT content on social media. Another arm of the work that we do is among younger children, so pre-adolescent kids that are coming to our pediatric emergency department for mental health reasons. We recently did a retrospective review of records for about 900 kids in our emergency department. And of these 8 to 12-year-olds, about 8% of them, the doctor had indicated something about LGBT identity for these kids. Be that sort of self-disclosure of identity, bullying related to identity, something of the like. And what was very, very troubling was that nearly all of these kids that indicated their LGBT identity, almost all of them had come in for recent thoughts of suicide or had come in directly following a suicide attempt. And so again, we're submitting funding now, hopefully to do a larger study to track suicide risk in these high-risk youth, so 8 to 12-year-olds that are discharged from our pediatric emergency department, really trying to understand a broader suite of risk factors and family environment, but again, hoping to really replicate and expand on these identity-related findings. And then last, a large part of my work also is aiming to support other LGBT scientists. So a lot of my science is focused on youth and adolescents, where we see a lot of these mental health issues. But these issues and disparities don't go away in adulthood. And so I recently did a survey of other faculty, sort of like me in the field, that are doing work in psychology and neuroscience. And of about 500 LGBT scientists that responded to this, 1 in 4 report experiences of discrimination at work. This was like a year or 2 ago. And about 40% report at least moderate symptoms of depression. And so there is really, again, a leaky pipeline in STEM and in our field that we need to do a lot more to create a supportive climate for scientists to stay in this field. And I had been hoping to submit funding, federal funding, to expand this work and find more ways to support LGBT scientists, but with the new limitations on equity-related research, it's going to be very hard to find ways to kind of support and build out a lot of elements of this work. So with that, I just want to thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.